Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It is Monday, November 4th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 6-2 after a bye in Week 9 of the 2024 NFL season. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to be joined by Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and take the pulse of the Steelers as they come off their bye week, and then I'm going to give you my six-pack of bye week thoughts, maybe some wide receiver trade targets with the deadline a day away, and take a look at the Steelers' biggest competition in the AFC North, because the Steelers may not have Lamar Jackson's number anymore. So without further ado, Brian Batko. To the show, Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And Brian, you're down there on the South Side now, and you just had a fantastic story in the Post-Gazette about Steelers special teams coordinator Danny Smith. And he's kind of become a folk hero for this team as the special teams keeps coming up with big play after big play after big play. And you just came out of the locker room. It feels like the vibe around this Steelers team coming off the bye week is a little bit different than it's been in years past, at least as an outside observer. What are you feeling from the guys and hearing and seeing as you're around them all the time?
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. The vibes are definitely good right now with the Steelers. I mean, it's not just that they're 6-2, but seems like both sides of the ball are getting the job done. And yeah, I mean, throw in that third phase too with Danny Smith and his guys. Special teams really have a lot to feel good about at the moment. So I think that's part of the reason why it does seem like the mood is so good around here. Not only are they winning, but they're doing it in a different way, a more encouraging way than they had really the last few seasons when they would, grind out games and kind of win by the skin of their teeth. I mean, last couple decisively, the last three really decisively. I mean, it's almost kind of weird to group it from the pre-Russell Wilson to post-Russell Wilson era right now for this 2024 Steelers team. But yeah, I think everybody can really feel good about what they're contributing right now. Nobody's playing abjectly poorly outside of maybe Broderick Jones. And the run defense is kind of looming as a potential second half of the season concern. But obviously, they've pulled out of their little Colts Cowboys tailspin, and I think the guys are about as positive as I've seen them in quite some time.
So you mentioned it, obviously the change from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson. How did you gauge that move from Mike Tomlin, both as an observer of football and as somebody who's talking to these guys? Did the mood shift in the locker room? Was there some apprehension after making that change at 4-2? And how has that changed after the two wins with Russell Wilson?
I think there was some apprehension. I think there was some confusion too among players a little bit. I mean, they got to be thinking, we're 4-2. We just took care of the Raiders pretty handily on the road in Vegas. And I mean, yes, the Raiders aren't very good, but I mean, don't tell a guy in an NFL locker room that it's not easy to win or that it is easy to win an NFL game. I mean, they don't take those for granted. And as we've seen the parity in the league this year too, it seems like anybody can kind of get tripped up just about any week. I think you'll see the separation increase a little bit maybe now after the trade deadline as teams unload some of their better players and other teams load up for the stretch run. But yeah, I think guys were a little, I don't know if concerned is the right word, but yeah, just maybe not expecting the quarterback change at that point. I think guys were believing in Justin Fields. I think they were really kind of rallying around him. And you heard multiple players, especially Najee Harris, saying Justin Fields didn't have to shoulder any blame for the offense's issues at times. And, the writing was on the wall at that point that Mike Tomlin was going to turn to Russell Wilson. And I think Justin Fields had won over this locker room in a major way. But I mean, whether guys were on board with the switch or not, when you're winning and you're doing it fluidly, as Mike Tomlin loves to say these days, that gets everybody on board really quickly. So doesn't mean the bottom can't fall out. Doesn't mean that the second half of this season, when the opponents by and large get tougher, that doesn't mean that it'll keep going that way. But I think it went from a situation where, yeah, there was a little bit of, worry about what was going to happen. But give credit to Russell Wilson. He quickly turned any of those fears into confidence pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I want to get into the ceiling of what this offense can kind of be in the second half. Obviously, the schedule gets a lot tougher for the Steelers. Anyone can beat anyone, but the teams on the second half of the schedule can beat a lot of teams. But first, something I noticed against the Giants on Monday Night Football with Russell Wilson was the first drive they came out kind of up tempo, right? And when Wilson first came in against the Jets, it was more audibles at the line of scrimmage, just stuff you can hear even picking it up on the TV copy. He has more command, and it seems like more freedom in the offense than maybe Fields did, and certainly than Kenny Pickett or Mitchell Trubisky or Mason Rudolph did. When is the last time you've seen a Steelers quarterback have this much confidence in them from the coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the late stages of Ben Roethlisberger, and I think that's kind of an inherent advantage of going to an experienced quarterback. I mean, Russell Wilson's extremely accomplished in this league and obviously has at least some of the physical skills still that he did early in his career, especially the arm strength that it's not like that's left him. But even if he didn't, even if we were talking about an Andy Dalton type or Joe Flacco up in Indy, who just lost last night to the Vikings, of course. But I think anybody who's been around the league that long and has seen this many opposing coverages and defenses, yeah, they're going to have more command. They're going to have more confidence and conviction at the line with what they're seeing. And that doesn't always mean they're going to be right. I mean, you can confuse an older guy too, but that's had to be one of the advantages Mike Tomlin was weighing going from Fields to Wilson. And it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, when they went from Pickett to Rudolph last year and stayed in that mode down the stretch all the way into the wild card playoff games, you're sacrificing a little bit of Kenny Pickett's improvisational skills and the mobility for Rudolph. But in this case, you know, you're making a much bigger sacrifice going from what Justin Fields can do with his legs to Russell Wilson. But right now it hasn't hurt you. Maybe there's been some red zone opportunities squandered, or maybe there's been some short yardage chances that didn't go your way, and perhaps Justin Fields would have just tucked it and run. But I feel like they're also staying out of those situations more because Russell Wilson is staying on schedule and in rhythm, and this offense is working out timing wise, and they haven't, had to play too much of that kind of scramble football to this point that Justin Fields is good at, but it's not necessarily sustainable for 4 quarters, let alone an entire season. So the offense is humming, Josh, in a way that I feel like I haven't observed since the end of Ben Roethlisberger's tenure. And that doesn't mean that it was always potent late in his career. And we'll see if it can continue to be with Russ, but you do feel a sea change a little bit in that way.
With those red zone issues, obviously Fields had an injury kind of crop up ahead of Monday Night Football and after he lost the job. Do you foresee there being a solution on the roster? We might want to talk a little bit wide receiver trades possibly, but those red zone issues are a real thing. They haven't hurt them yet. Do you foresee there being a solution on the roster? And would it possibly be a Justin Fields red zone package at some point? Or is it just going to be the Russell Wilson show entirely? Obviously, he's the starter, but do you foresee any world in which Fields helps solve those woes?
I think they're going to try to figure out the Russell Wilson show, as you put it, and kind of exhaust all possibilities of how to get it going in that way. But, it is nice to have that club in your bag still with Justin Fields, assuming he's healthy now. I mean, there's 9 games left in the regular season, and then they hope a lengthy postseason run. So that's still a lot of season left to incorporate some of those wrinkles potentially with Justin Fields. If you feel like you're getting a little bit stale with the looks you're giving offensively, especially once you get into December and January football. I mean, they haven't had any bad weather games yet. That could always change in the AFC North hunt. Then maybe you do work in a Justin Fields sub package. Maybe you do try to take advantage of his mobility if it feels like you're getting bogged down too often. So I think Mike Tomlin has loved that possibility from the moment he got this quarterback room together. He mentioned it going back to OTAs, to training camp, and even end of August once he names Russell Wilson the starter, saying Justin Fields playing at times is very much on the table. And I feel like he wanted that to be a message to opposing defensive coordinators that they do have to prepare for that. Well, you're going to need to put it on film, I think, at some point to get other teams to really respect it. But yeah, I mean, they're in a good situation right now, quarterback wise. I feel like as much of a reality show as this could have become, the distractions and the drama have been kept at a minimum because both of those guys played fairly well and because they both are handling it very well, at least publicly in the interviews and kind of dealing with the the natural friction that there's going to be when there's two guys vying for one job.
Yeah, it seems like something that Mike Tomlin is excellent at, right? We always see the decisions on Sunday, but a coach is often, they make or break their career Monday to Saturday in a lot of cases. And it seems like that's gone over more smoothly than one would have expected. Were there certain guys in the locker room? Obviously, Pickens is kind of the one who made the Wilson announcement. Were there certain guys in the locker room who kind of had allegiances or anything of that sort in that decision?
I don't know that there are allegiances. I think these guys just they're happy with whoever is going to help them win, and especially someone like George Pickens. I mean, he's happy with whoever's going to be able to get him the ball reliably, consistently, and maybe that's nothing against Fields either. I mean, it could just be, hey, Arthur Smith or Mike Tomlin, they didn't want to trust this offense to open up as much with Justin back there for whatever reason. So it's not necessarily that those guys didn't see eye to eye or weren't on the same page, but if they're running a more mature, just well-rounded, thought-out passing offense with Wilson in there, then George Pickens is going to be on board with that. Pat Freiermuth is going to be on board with that. Like I said, I think everybody was fairly happy with what Justin Fields was bringing to the offense, but everybody always wants to score more points. Everybody wants more targets. Everybody wants more catches and yards. So, I mean, I think having Fields in there increase the threat of the run game. You've got to keep defenses have to stay accountable to quarterback pulling it out of a guy's gut and taking it himself. And, that's not really there anymore with Russell Wilson, but, the play action passing attack has been dynamic through 2 games with him. He's clearly been an upgrade in that regard. And that also can help Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, because a 2-dimensional balanced offense is, it's going to keep defenses back. It's going to keep those safeties up there higher up on your screen if you're watching at home. So all of it is clicking at the moment. And as long as it keeps going that way, I think Fields is a really mature, that's the other thing too. I mean, talk about the confidence at the line of scrimmage that Russ brings to the game. I think Justin Fields is confident, but he doesn't have as long of a resume and experience as Wilson does. And they're both with new teams. I think one of those guys can approach it as, hey, I've hoisted the Lombardi trophy. I'm going to be wearing that gold jacket. And the other one is still trying to figure out what his NFL career is going to look like. So that's why this has been a really interesting quarterback dynamic from the jump. And so far it's working out for the Steelers, and you got to tip your cap to Mike Tomlin for playing this thing well to this point.
Somebody else that it seems like the switch to Russell Wilson has unlocked is Calvin Austin, at least a little bit, with some deep shots and some dynamic plays. We saw the punt return. Is it possible he's the answer at wide receiver too, or are the Steelers still scouring the trade market that seems to be drying up, especially with a Christian Kirk injury, and maybe he was going to be the answer for the Steelers? How do you see that playing out?
I think the Christian Kirk move would not have done a lot to get my juices flowing, honestly. I just think that they've got a lot of those under 6 foot guys who are quick and can uncover in a hurry. Calvin Austin is that. I mean, he's shorter even than Kirk, so I don't know that he's ever going to be a viable every week wide receiver 2 in the NFL. But I mean, you have to love what he can pitch in from time to time. Saw it against the Giants, not just in the receiving game, but on the punt return. So yeah, I mean, you're going to pick your spots with him. Going to be kind of matchup and game plan based. I think Russell Wilson is better at getting that out of him than maybe Justin Fields, at least at this point in his career. I still think they're going to keep scouring. I still think Omar Khan is going to be busy over these next 24 hours. There's just been too many dalliances or reported dalliances with veteran receivers on the trade market, going back to Brandon Ayuk, really all offseason, free agency through the draft, and it heated up, of course, during training camp. But Devontae Adams' interest was there. I'm pretty sure they were interested in Cooper Kupp, although that didn't get very far down the road because of what the Rams have been able to do in recent weeks. And then, it's been reported now widely that they were, in on Christian Kirk pretty solidly. So I think they're going to take a flyer on somebody. It's just going to be a matter of what's the best value Omar Khan can extract from teams that are basically calling it a season. at this point. It might not be a real inspiring name. And honestly, if they do bring somebody in, whoever it's going to be at this point, it's going to be somebody who has some question marks. I don't think there's going to be a slam dunk DK Metcalf acquisition or anything like that. It's going to be an aging guy, maybe somebody with some injury problems. But I think with Van Jefferson playing as much as he is and as inconsistent as the other receiving core options have been, why not take a chance on somebody? And if it doesn't work out, it's kind of like the William Jackson trade from a couple years ago. You just that condition's not met, no harm, no foul, and you move on.
Do you have any names that you're looking out for? Obviously, Mike Williams is somebody that's been floated, maybe Kendrick Bourne. Are there any others, or are those kind of the main guys that you've been hearing and been considering?
I mean, Kendrick Bourne doesn't really move the meter much for me with, coming out of the Patriots. And they've got a few guys that they might as well dangle at this point. The one that I mentioned in my mailbag last week for the Post-Gazette that they've reportedly been getting calls on, and I don't know that the Steelers are interested in him, but Tyquan Thornton, who was I think a second-round pick a couple years ago. I mean, he's got good size, 6'2" or 6'3". He ran like a 4.2 something. I mean, he's basically a deep ball merchant at this point. But again, those are the kind of, if you can get him for cheap from a team that's ready to move on from a guy that might be considered a bust, then why not give it a shot? Darius Slayton, it seems like the Giants are trying to maintain any leverage they possibly can. But if Omar Khan can get somebody who's basically just going to crack by 4 p.m. tomorrow, I think it could be them. I think it could be the Jets with Mike Williams. I think it could be the Panthers with Adam Thielen. I'm not quite as high on him as maybe some other people are in Pittsburgh media or Steelers fans, but he could have a good rapport with another vet in Russell Wilson. He could get the magic elixir of getting out of Carolina and all of a sudden he's perfectly healthy. I mean, in all seriousness, it could do him good that he's been on the shelf for a while rather than playing for the Panthers. He just has a bad contract. So, I mean, those are the names I think that you're hearing most often. And then some of the ones that haven't necessarily been connected to the Steelers, but I think would make sense when you look at the team that you'd be acquiring them from and the role they could play here would be Jacoby Myers from the Raiders and old friend Tyler Boyd from the Titans. Maybe he's washed at this point, but I think he'd be good for the culture. I don't know. The Steelers have had plenty of opportunities through free agency. They could have brought him in then. Maybe he's just not their kind of guy at this point.
Yeah, it seems like it's just a lot of dart throws, similar to what drafting Roman Wilson in the mid-round was, and it's either going to work out or it's not. Do you see if they don't make a move? Because Omar Khan has been the golden boy for some of the trades, especially the Chase Claypool trade, ingratiated him to the fan base really quickly, and some great draft classes as well. Do you think this team can reach its ultimate ceiling, whether that be first, second round of the playoffs, winning a couple playoff games, or winning any playoff game for the first time in a while? Do you think they can reach that ceiling without making a move at wide receiver?
I think they could. I mean, I think there's guys, such as, Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson. And if Roman Wilson can take this at least 4-week stint on injured reserve to get healthy, and maybe he's a wild card down the stretch, I wouldn't bet on that, but at least you do have a third-round rookie with that kind of talent waiting in the wings. They could get sort of ancillary production from the dudes who are on the practice squad, like Brandon Johnson and Quez Watkins. Ben Skoronek's on injured reserve. He could be back at some point. So, I mean, they have some guys who have made plays in the NFL. And if Omar Khan doesn't get the right kind of deal on his doorstep, then, perhaps he will just try to roll with them and hope that Russell Wilson can elevate. You've also got the tight ends in the mix. Maybe you can get Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, even Connor Hayward more involved in the second half of this season. So as far as their ceiling goes, I still need to see more, especially from this offense, especially from the run defense, to predict that they're going to win a playoff game for the first time in 7 years. But I feel a lot better about it than I did coming into the season. I'll say that much. I want to see what they do against the Commanders and Ravens here in these back-to-back weeks. These should be two really fun games that are decent litmus tests for the Steelers. The Jets and Giants, as much talent as they have in certain spots of their roster, they're pretty dysfunctional. So now you're going to play against a couple teams that are functional and confident and feeling good about where they are right now in the NFL standings too.
What has been the situation with Roman Wilson? Obviously, there was an ankle injury in the preseason that kind of just put him behind the eight ball. Why wasn't he, even when healthy before suffering this new injury, why wasn't he able to kind of work his way onto the field?
He did miss a lot of time in training camp, and I get that. I understand that explanation from Mike Tomlin and company, really, since that high ankle sprain on the first padded practice out in Latrobe. But I mean, and obviously I'm not writing the guy off, halfway through his rookie season. But it just, I think it says a lot that, they weren't itching to get him on the field. They weren't itching to get him up to speed. So, whether it was taking longer for him to recover or whether he didn't have the same burst and speed that he had prior to the injury. I mean, he is a smaller guy. He's somewhat thin at this point too in his career. So, what he is going to offer to you at this point probably is very reliant on what he's able to do in and out of his breaks and, getting off that press coverage and being able to get open in a small space. I mean, that's what Calvin Austin is doing right now for them. If Roman Wilson isn't 110% in that area, then his chances of contributing to this Steelers roster as it stands are not even as good as they were when he was drafted. So I think that's part of the issue right now with what's looking like it's going to be a lost rookie season for him. He's obviously got to work hard now in the interim while he's dealing with this hamstring in this injured reserve stint. So, yeah, I mean, it's been rough. I think, that there's so many other rookie receivers who are helping their teams at the moment, and it can be done. I think even if you do miss some time, it can be done, but just a lot of factors at work here right now. And they are, like I said, they're not champing at the bit to try to get him out there, it seems.
Yeah, it seems like that is similar to Calvin Austin, kind of just a lost rookie season with an injury early that kind of throws things off. Two more before I let you go, and thanks again so much for the time. Cam Sutton coming back from his suspension. Is it going to be Beanie Bishop's job or is it going to be Cam Sutton's? How are they going to handle that possible transition? Is it going to be a transition or is it just, okay, now we have some great depth? Because Sutton struggled a lot in Detroit, and obviously there were the off-field issues, but he was probably their best corner before he left for that big deal in free agency.
Yeah, I think he was miscast as a number one outside guy with the Lions, and they found that out the hard way at times last season. So I think they're going to ride with Beanie Bishop and just kind of, it's going to be clear and transparent to him that Sutton is eligible to return now, and he's going to feel it in practice too, probably, because it would make sense to get Sutton those reps. They weren't doing it so much in training camp because they knew they weren't going to have him for the first 8 games. They were kind of trying to move him around and probably take an extended look at him in some different roles than he might play now that he's back. But yeah, I mean, that's the good thing right now about their slot corner situation. I think Bishop has exceeded expectations in some ways. It was looking a little shaky in the Dallas game. And, even before that, there were some miscommunications and misplays. Maybe the interceptions that he's been coming up with are masking some of the deficiencies, but it looks like the game is starting to slow down for him a little bit halfway through his rookie year, which is encouraging. If it doesn't, if teams continue to pick on him and if he stops making plays on the ball, then yeah, you do have a vet in Sutton who knows this defense really well, who's probably going to be plenty motivated, honestly, given the way everything went down in Detroit and certainly the reputation that he has, fairly or unfairly around the league because of the legal issues and the assault charge and everything that ultimately got him released by the Lions. He's probably going to be somebody who's motivated at this stage of his career to show that he's got something left and that he can help this team. I didn't necessarily think the Steelers should have gone down that road with him, but they did. They're here. They've stuck with him. I think they're going to give him an opportunity at some point, but it might take a slip up by Beanie Bishop for him to really get in there a lot.
On the trade deadline, it seems like that's no longer a hole that they have to plug. It felt like nickel might be something they would want to target. Yeah. Are there any other positions they're going to be looking to upgrade at all, or is it just receiver or bust and we stand pat with everything else? Because the roster looks fairly solidified aside from some offensive tackle issues, but you've invested a lot there. So how many more darts are you going to throw at that?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's always areas that you can try to get an upgrade. And tackle right now is one where Broderick Jones he's just playing bad football. But I think with, a first round pedigree guy, you've probably got to live with it. Try to coach him up, try to get him better second half of the season. Defensive line, they're kind of leaking oil lately. I wonder if that's an area where would the Steelers say, hey, if we can get somebody for super cheap, maybe it doesn't hurt to throw them in the mix. They signed Braden Fajoko to the practice squad after losing Montravius Adams. So he's on IR. So, the depth is starting to wear thin a little bit. I think you got to feel confident that Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, and Larry Ogunjobi are going to pick it up here down the stretch. But you're going to see a lot better rushing attacks from here on out. Maybe they do try to just flip like a seventh rounder or something to a team that's out of it and just, bring in a guy with some size who can maybe be a specialist of some sort. But yeah, I think receiver is still the big one. And yeah, the D-line, I guess, would be the other one that maybe keep an eye on depending on how aggressive Omar Khan wants to be by 4 p.m. Tuesday.
Last thing, any updates coming out of locker room availability this morning?
No, Cam Sutton talked a little bit, and he just said he's going to be ready for whatever. He's been in the building for 4 weeks now, but the NFL policy on suspended players was couldn't practice with the team, could only work out one-on-one with like the strength staff, and he could be in meetings with the team and individual position coaches. Now they actually have a chance to get him out there on the practice field today. So check back with us from the Post-Gazette to see what kind of insight we can glean on how they're using Cam Sutton, how often, and maybe what he can bring to this defense in the second half of the season.
Absolutely. We'll be following all season. Thanks for coming back on the show, Brian. And we'll be following your work. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Josh. See you, man.
Again, huge thanks to Brian Batko. He was excellent on everything we need to know about the Steelers bye week, but that's not it for the show. Don't worry. I have my 6-pack of bye week thoughts about the Pittsburgh Steelers as they sit at 6-2 in a pretty nice spot, despite a really tough schedule in the second half of the year. And I know I've said that all season long. I've said that going back to the offseason, harped on how hard it is going to be for this team to win in the second half of the year. And now we're going to see what they're made of with Russell Wilson at quarterback. And that brings me to my first bye week thought in this 6-pack. I don't think any wide receiver move is really going to move the needle for this team. The Steelers missed out on Brandon Ayuk and Devontae Adams. And I don't know that those moves would have been the right direction necessarily for this franchise, considering the instability at quarterback. Now it feels like there is maybe more stability at quarterback. It's 2 games in, so I have to temper that. But the Steelers aren't going to get DK Metcalf. The Steelers aren't going to get Cooper Kupp. Those things aren't going to happen. The Rams are too good to trade Cooper Kupp. The Seahawks are probably too good to trade DK Metcalf, and I just don't think that's a move that's going to get made between now and tomorrow for the trade deadline. And then you look at the other options out there. We talked about it with Brian. It's Adam Thielen, Tyler Boyd, KJ Osborne. Those guys are all primary slots. And you're in an offense where you have an emerging slot receiver in Calvin Austin that I would rather see what he has than try to integrate a new face into this offense when it's not a massive upgrade, right? Because Calvin Austin gives you field stretching ability from the slot and from the outside. The spot you want to upgrade is the Van Jefferson spot. That feels more important, especially in this offense with Arthur Smith that doesn't utilize slot receivers a ton, right? Calvin Austin's getting in the mix more with Russell Wilson, but it's not going to be a huge fixture in this offense. Okay, let's get somebody on the outside because even Pat Freiermuth is doing really well in the slot when he's taking reps there. And they have a lot of depth at tight end with Connor Hayward and Darnell Washington. So there's talent on this offense. The spot you want to upgrade is the Van Jefferson spot. There are a couple guys who can play outside. Darius Slayton and Jacoby Myers are my 2 favorites, right? Christian Kirk got hurt. He's primarily a slot receiver too, but I think just the caliber of player he is quite a bit above an aging Thielen and aging Boyd. a KJ Osborne, a Kendrick Bourne coming off an injury, a Mike Williams, who is an outside guy, but pretty redundant with George Pickens in terms of his skill set, and coming off an ACL injury, and he just hasn't looked good with the Jets. So you have Darius Slayton from the Giants and Jacoby Myers from the Raiders. The Raiders already moved on from Devontae Adams, and this morning they fired Luke Getsy, their offensive coordinator. So maybe this is a full fire sale situation. They benched Gardner Minshew for Desmond Ridder yesterday. That's desperation if you're throwing Desmond Ridder out there. So maybe they just ship off Jacoby Myers for whatever they can get. And I think that would be a bona fide wide receiver 2 who you could put opposite George Pickens, who would actually meaningfully change the outcome of the Steelers season. But beyond him, I don't see Darius Slayton really doing that. You're getting maybe another field stretcher like Batko mentioned. Tyquan Thornton could potentially be from New England. Myers is my pick, my best option, the guy I want Omar Khan to go get. But even that, adding Jacoby Myers to this offense, I don't think that puts you in a situation where it's now Super Bowl. And the way Russell Wilson has played has already elevated you to a team that can and should have the expectation that it's going to win a playoff game. Now we have to see what it looks like against the better teams in the second half of the season. But Russell Wilson's already taken that leap for me. From 10 wins, first round exit, to maybe 10 or 11 wins, but we should be competing in that first round in a meaningful way. Unlike last year, unlike the most recent trips to the playoffs, when you get blown out by the Chiefs, you get beat by the Bills pretty handedly, even though that game was a little bit closer with Mason Rudolph. And I don't think Jacoby Myers does anything to change that, right? Maybe a Devontae Adams would have. And maybe that's a move they should have explored further. I think he was just going to go to the Jets because Aaron Rodgers was there. But I don't think any of the remaining receivers on the market meaningfully move the needle for the Steelers and make them a Super Bowl team. That's number one. Number two in this six-pack is about the red zone offense. And we talked about that with Batko as well. The red zone offense has had some real problems with Russell Wilson. I think it'll continue to get better as the receivers get on the same page as Wilson. He's somebody who still likes to scramble, even though he doesn't so much have the athletic ability that made him an elite scrambler when he was in Seattle and competing in NFC championship games and winning Super Bowl. And we have a message in the chat going back to the wide receivers. What about the Broncos and Courtland Sutton? While he's maybe the best player of the bunch that we're still mentioning, aside from DK Metcalf and Cooper Kupp, the Broncos have been apprehensive to move him. They're trying to bring along Bo Nix. I don't think that's a guy that's going to get moved. Even after the Broncos got blown out yesterday by the Ravens, they're still in the playoff picture. And again, that's somebody that's just played with Russell Wilson. And it's somebody that is fairly redundant, again, with George Pickens' skill set. Like, this is not an early separator. This is a late separator, a contested catch winner. Those guys do well with Russell Wilson. But I don't see that being a realistic option from the reporting that we've heard and from the fact that the Steelers have called about Courtland Sutton and nothing has happened there. So back to number two with this red zone offense. It's only 2 games with Russell Wilson. He'll continue to get on the same page with his receivers. And there were touchdowns that were wiped off the board for fairly fluky reasons, right? Pickens had a touchdown. He didn't get both feet down. He got 1 foot down twice. That's a rare situation that's not going to happen very often. It was a good throw from Wilson into a tight window. He's still shown the ability to make those tight window throws, to trust receivers like George Pickens. That's going to pay off in the red zone. There was also a Van Jefferson route when he nearly had a touchdown. He didn't sit down in zone coverage. He continued to run the route deeper, and Wilson threw it behind him. That's just a miscommunication, and it makes sense because this is a new quarterback getting up to speed with new receivers that he hasn't played much with because he was hurt, and Wilson didn't play a ton of football because he got benched in Denver before he got cut. So I think some issues with rust with Russell Wilson and some adjustments to how they function how they being the receivers function in those tight areas with him as he tries to extend plays as a scrambler, as he throws contested catches. I think those things will all help improve the red zone offense. I'm not sounding alarms about the red zone offense, but when Justin Fields is healthy, I think you have to feature him in the red zone. Not a situation where Russell Wilson gets you to the 18-yard line. Oh, we're in the red zone. Justin Fields gets the next 5 plays. That's absurd. But a situation where, okay, 2nd and 3 from the 11, let's throw Fields out there and see if he can use his legs. Right? Give them a different look. And there's a real reason for that, right? Like, the thought is that Fields, with his running ability, would have helped the Steelers' run game more than he did. And part of the problem there is Fields stretches a defense and threatens a defense horizontally, while Wilson threatens a defense vertically. And Fields wasn't hitting enough deep shots to scare safeties to stay deep. So he's stretching them horizontally with things like option plays or quarterback power. That threatens a defense. But it threatens a defense more in the red zone when you can stretch them horizontally more than you can stretch them vertically. And Wilson's advantage of the vertical threat has helped Najee Harris a lot in the run game. But that vertical stretch element is gone when you're at the 14. You're not going to throw a 30-yard bomb because it'd be 15 rows into those seats. So the Steelers have one of the best red zone quarterbacks in the NFL in Justin Fields because quarterback run is so crucial around the goal line. It just gives you an extra body in the run game, right? When a quarterback is just handing the ball off, you're playing 10 on 11 because the quarterback is no longer in that play. When the quarterback is the threat to keep it or does keep it, you're playing 11 on 11. And that bears itself out in the red zone. Justin Fields leads this team with 5 rushing touchdowns, and he hasn't played the past 2 games. And he's not anywhere near threatened by Najee Harris, who just has 2 and is second in rushing touchdowns. I think when Fields is healthy, you have to give the look. Maybe it's something they were saving, right? You're blowing out the Jets. You're blowing out the Giants. You don't want to create more of a controversy in those situations because you're handing the reins to Russell Wilson. You don't want Fields to be an afterthought in everyone's mind. You don't want that to be a conversation. Okay, we flushed that now. 2 wins, bye week, Wilson's the starter. You can start to integrate Justin Fields. I think they will, and I think it'll be very beneficial to the red zone offense, even if I do think it'll get better with Russell Wilson alone. And now that brings us to number 3. The unsung rookies on this team maybe saved the season in the early part of the year. You start really hot, 3-0, and then you lose 2 games to the Colts and Cowboys that you shouldn't. And you're taking on water with offensive line injuries. James Daniels, who was the best offensive lineman on this team, goes down, out for the year. Sayamalu finally comes back, and you lose your other guard. Mason McCormick has been very steady for a 4th-round rookie at right guard. He is not going to be on any all-pro ballots, and he shouldn't be. But he's been a solid run blocker. He's yet to allow a sack. He's not giving up a ton of interior pressure. Even with Ryan McCollum next to him instead of Zach Frazier against the Giants, Dexter Lawrence didn't wreck the game. He had a couple of reps that were dominant, but he didn't wreck the game. And that's a huge credit to Mason McCormick, also to Ryan McCollum, but Zach Frazier is going to come back. And why I say unsung rookies is because the guys I'm highlighting are Mason McCormick and Beanie Bishop, who was undrafted, right? The highlight of this draft class was obviously the first rounder, as any draft class is going to be, with Troy Fautanu, and he gets hurt. Those things happen, out for the year. Okay, Zach Frazier has been great. 2nd-round pick, a lot of attention, center of the future, and he's been that. He's lived up to all of it and exceeded expectations. But coming out of the draft, another guy that's getting a ton of attention was Roman Wilson. And he's played like 5 snaps? And it's been injuries, and it's been maybe a lack of faith from the coaching staff in the young receiver. So now your 4th rounder and your undrafted guy are arguably 2 of your most consistent pieces in spots that could be major flaws on this roster, right? Once you lose a guard and you lost Nate Herbig, not Nick Herbig, on the offensive line before the season, and then you lose James Daniels. Sayamalu was out for the beginning of the year. So it's Spencer Anderson. He's really struggling. McCormick goes in at left guard. Sayamalu comes back. Daniels gets hurt. McCormick goes over to right guard. He's just plugging holes, and that's been incredibly valuable. And then on the other side, Beanie Bishop he was a big problem, and he's suddenly not a problem anymore. There's some randomness to interceptions, but he's making those big plays, and regardless of if it's kind of a random occurrence, they're happening, right? Like, there is skill that goes into making an interception, obviously, but there's some randomness with turnovers. That's just the nature of football and small sample size. But even if he's not super assignment sound, and he had issues with that, the Colts picked on him a ton with Joe Flacco. He's gotten better at that, and he's had the big plays. So now Cameron Sutton's coming back from his suspension, and he's just depth, right? Batko said they're probably going to stick with Beanie Bishop for the most part at the nickel spot. That's huge. That's huge if you have an undrafted rookie, and they did it again with an undrafted rookie like they did with Mike Hilton. If that's what Beanie Bishop turns into, that's really huge. And a big reason that this team doesn't have more losses and more problems heading into the trade deadline. And before we get to thought number 4, we'll hit Yinzer Joe and Steel 43 in the chat. Love interaction from the chat. And Yinzer Joe says, I have a feeling Fields was made to look good and they will use him as a trade piece, providing Wilson stays hot and healthy. Well, 2 problems with that. Quarterback depth is incredibly important to this team. It's one of their trump cards that they have over other teams in the AFC playoff race. If Wilson goes down, they have a viable option. Not many other teams have that. And Fields is on an expiring contract, and the deadline is tomorrow. So there's not much time to move this guy. And this is a guy who you got for a late round pick. Nobody is that encouraged by what they saw from Justin Fields and that desperate at quarterback to try to save their season, right? There are a lot of teams that need them, but those teams have 2 wins. They're not worried about saving their season. So I don't think you could get much for a Fields trade on an expiring deal. And I don't think the Steelers should even consider that. I don't think that's something that's viable or necessarily logical for this team going forward. Steel 43 says, I hope for your sake they do trade Justin Fields. I hope they do not, because that would not be a good trade and they would not get much back for Justin Fields on that one. And that brings us to number 4 on the 6-pack as we move through this on the bye week. A lot of bye week thoughts about this team. And this one's about this team's best player. TJ Watt is the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's minus 135 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Chris Jones is plus 1,000. Trey Hendrickson is plus 1,000. They have the next best odds, and those are very long odds. But TJ Watt won't win the Defensive Player of the Year without some help from Mike Tomlin and this defensive coaching staff. I think he's one of the 3, 4, 5 best defensive players in the NFL. There's no question about that. I think he should absolutely already have more Defensive Player of the Year awards than he does. This is not TJ Watt's best statistical season. He's been better against the run than he's been as a pass rusher. He doesn't have the raw numbers that he's going to need to win this award as an edge rusher, which you just need these raw sack numbers and pressure numbers. We saw it with Myles Garrett beating TJ Watt, even when Watt led the league in sacks. Like, you need these other numbers to help you. Watt doesn't really have them, and a lot of that is the fault of this coaching staff just sticking him on the left side or the right side of the offensive line, left side of the defensive line, and rushing him against the right tackle every play because offenses can game plan around that. Talked about this a lot with chip rate. There's no creativity along that defensive line until last Monday, until the Steelers showed some creativity with Watt flipping him around with Highsmith. Now, that's not the most creative idea in NFL history, just switching your defensive ends so Watt gets a better matchup, but it turned into a sack right away. They need to move him around. They need to make this pass rush a little more unpredictable, or else Watt just isn't going to reach those counting stats that he needs. And he's 35th in the NFL with 22 pressures. Jonathan Grenard leads the league at 48. Trey Hendrickson is at 46. Fake sacks are not as good as real sacks, as we say in Pittsburgh, and we hate PFF. But they still matter. If you're getting to the quarterback a lot, that's more opportunities for sacks. That's more opportunities to disrupt plays. And Watt is the most clutch defensive player in the league. The strip sack to seal things against the Giants proved it once again. But he's 45th in the league in pass rush win rate. A lot of that is because he's getting doubled and chipped a ton. He's 9th in sacks with 6.5. Hendrickson is first with 11. So he's falling behind that. And before the Giants game, he hadn't had a sack for 2 games. He's second in the league in tackles for loss. He's been a monster against the run. Chipping and double team isn't that meaningful. Giving him traffic to navigate isn't that meaningful against the run when he can just blow up the guy in front of him. So TJ Watt has been still one of the best defensive players in the league, maybe the best, because Myles Garrett isn't having a dominant season in Cleveland, and that team is a mess. Micah Parsons has been hurt. Like, a lot of the other top contenders are falling away. But a guy like Hendrickson, if the Bengals steady the ship, fix their defense, I think he would make sense as somebody who would get some recognition. A guy like Nick Bosa, who's lurking around the plus 1,000 odds area for Defensive Player of the Year. TJ Watt, the favorite at minus 135. If the 49ers turn it on and Bosa already has better counting stats than TJ Watt, I think it'll be tough for Watt to win it, and it'll be tough for Watt to rack up those counting stats without some more creativity from the coaching staff. Been calling for it all year. We saw it against the Giants. Maybe they were just keeping that card up their sleeve until the bigger games on the schedule, and we'll see if that's the case as those big games come up next week with the Steelers as an underdog heading to DC to play the Washington Commanders with rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels, who's an absolute stud and has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC and the NFL this entire year. So number 5. I hinted at this a little bit with maybe reframing my view on the Steelers' pursuit of Brandon Ayuk and Devontae Adams. With an aging defense and an aging quarterback, are the Steelers in win now mode? And should they be? Possibly. Because I've been wanting the Steelers to bridge things to a younger quarterback. But more than that, I've been wanting the Steelers to just draw a line in the sand and pick a direction. Are you in or are you out? Hovering around the middle, being in NFL purgatory since 2016 with no playoff wins, is not a viable way to sustain yourself as a successful franchise. You will never reach the top. So you either need to head for the bottom or go all in. And now that you've kind of struck gold through 2 games with Russell Wilson, it may be time to consider going all in. Either at this trade deadline, which there aren't many options to do so, a Jacoby Myers trade would be really nice, or this offseason, right? Say, okay, we've built up this defense. It's getting older. TJ Watt's not getting any younger. Cam Hayward's not getting any younger. We have a lot of nice young pieces. Let's trade a first-round pick. Let's get a bona fide wide receiver 2 in the offseason. Let's pay Russell Wilson to keep him around and try to build this thing up for a 2-year run with Russell Wilson after this year. That may be the window that the Steelers are entering. And I had not conceived of that really before the year. But if Wilson continues to play this well, that is the way they need to operate. They need to operate with legitimate aggressiveness because you have an older quarterback all of a sudden, and you have an aging defense with your best players over 30. Attack this and try to win in this window, or else you're going to end up in purgatory again, where you get a young quarterback, and by the time they get up to speed and are capable of winning playoff games, your defense is too old to compete. They may have lucked into a window with Russell Wilson getting cut by Denver and them eating a historic dead cap hit. If he still has enough juice left to get them into the playoffs and win a playoff game this year, going forward, they need to act accordingly, and they will have their direction. They will be a win now team. I'm open to that possibility more than I ever was coming into this year. And before we get to number 6, check in on the chat a little bit. And a message here from R Barley 18. The constant vanilla defense calls are mind-numbing. They absolutely are. And it's a lot of cover 3. It's a lot of rush 4. The Steelers are the lowest blitz rate team in the NFL. And you can do that when you have TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. You're making the roster investment so you don't have to make the scheme investment. That is sound team building and being coherent from the front office to the coaching staff. That doesn't mean you can't be creative and switch things up more and give offenses different looks. They really need to do that, and they'll really need to do that against one Lamar Jackson. Because I'm not sure that the Steelers have had Lamar Jackson's number as much as the Steelers have had Greg Roman's. Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens pounded the Denver Broncos 41-10 yesterday. The Denver Broncos, who, if you haven't heard, had arguably the best defense in the NFL, statistically maybe the best defense in the NFL. They were clearly in the top 5 in EPA and advanced metrics defensively. The Ravens did not give a shit. Put up 41 points on Denver, and Lamar Jackson is amidst his another MVP season, potentially going for his 3rd MVP, which would be very historic stuff for his age, considering that Baltimore was thinking about maybe even not paying him. He reached restricted free agency. He's simply one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And the Steelers, while they feel like they have Lamar Jackson's number, and people in Pittsburgh talk incredibly recklessly about what Lamar Jackson cannot do and what he is not as a quarterback, the Steelers haven't played Lamar Jackson since week 5 of 2023. That was a 17-10 Steelers win. Lamar went 22 for 38 for 236 yards and 1 interception with 4 sacks. He averaged 6.2 yards per attempt in that game. Other than that matchup, the Steelers played Jackson that one time in 2023. They didn't play him in 2022 because of injuries. 2021, week 13 was the only time they played him. And that was the last time they played him in the Greg Roman offense. They only played Lamar Jackson one time that year. So it's been a long time since they've actually gone against a full-strength Lamar Jackson Baltimore team. Sometimes it's because Baltimore's resting him. Sometimes it's been because he's hurt. But they haven't seen him a lot. And when they did see him last, they held him to 10 points. They won 17-10. But Lamar and Baltimore were still figuring out the Todd Monken offense. And the Todd Monken offense is very different from the Greg Roman offense. You had to make very significant roster investments to run Roman's heavy formation, run first, quarterback option attack. You need a lot of big bodies, a lot of tight ends, a lot of heavy personnel. And it took a while in 2023 to shift to Monken's more spread attack, right? You can't just bring in a new offensive coordinator and have a new identity when you have the same players on the roster. It's not as easy as that. So they had to slowly integrate this thing. Jackson had to get up to speed with more of a downfield passing attack, more of a mature passing attack than what Roman was asking him to do. And it feels like they finally reached the ultimate level of what this offense is going to be. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are giving Todd Monken elite level, Roman level run game without the roster and scheme investments that Roman's offense needed. And now that the Ravens traded for Deontay Johnson, they have enough weapons on the outside to be more of a spread team, right? Sometimes when they're going to these spread formations, it's still 12 personnel with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely both split out because they just don't have the bodies at receiver. They didn't invest that way because they were running a Greg Roman offense where you didn't need it. So now they're getting them. Rashad Bateman's looking a lot better in this offense, even though he had a big drop 2 weeks ago against the Browns. That was very costly. Deontay Johnson's going to be a good fit in this thing. And most importantly, the Todd Monken offense gives Lamar Jackson answers against the blitz. It gives him quick wins that way, right? When you're a downhill quarterback option run game, if you bring a lot of bodies on the line of scrimmage and attack that aggressively blitzing, it's going to be hard to establish that consistently. And the Steelers have owned the Greg Roman offense because of that. That's why Roman didn't last after Colin Kaepernick was a flash in the pan for the 49ers. Eventually that phased out because defenses can figure it out. And Lamar Jackson won his first MVP with Greg Roman, but eventually defense figured it out. And what they figured out is you just blitz them. They don't have quick answers. They don't have enough receivers that can win quickly. Blitz them. And when the Steelers played Lamar Jackson last against the Monken offense, but it was still new, they blitzed him on 62% of his dropbacks. That was when they held him to 6.2 yards per attempt. He had the interception, he had the 4 sacks, and the Steelers won 17-10. But Lamar Jackson is great against the blitz now, maybe the best in the NFL against the blitz. So let's go through these numbers, and I've just broken it down in the easiest possible way. Yards per attempt, right? That factors in completion percentage. It factors in how deep you're pushing the ball down the field. Factors in a lot of things. In 2018, against the blitz, Lamar Jackson's first year, he averaged 4.3 yards per attempt and was 44th in the NFL. In 2019, 7.9, 19th in the NFL. 2020, 7.3, 26th in the NFL. 2021, 6.8, 30th in the NFL. 2022, 7.1, 25th in the NFL. 2023 with Todd Monken as his offensive coordinator, 8.1, 8th in the NFL. And 2024, 9.7 yards per attempt, 3rd in the NFL, 11% pressure to sack ratio versus the blitz. He's completing 67% of his passes with 6 drops from his receivers on those throws and has 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. The Steelers can't blitz 62% of the time against this offense. It's not going to work. And the Steelers are 6-2, but they play the Ravens twice. They have one game in the loss column right now on Baltimore, but they're going to go head-to-head twice down the stretch. And to me, it's still advantage Baltimore, mostly because of the quarterback. So when the Steelers are looking at those games, when you're looking at those games as a fan and thinking, we have Lamar's number, maybe not. Maybe we had Greg Roman's number. And this is a very, very different offense with Todd Monken. Lamar Jackson is playing maybe better than any quarterback in the NFL. And right now that includes Patrick Mahomes. So it's going to be tough to win the AFC North, which should be the expectation and the goal of this team. And maybe that wasn't the case coming into the year. They've played well enough to play themselves into that expectation. Now you're going to have to find a new answer for Lamar because blitzing him and playing him the way you did in early 2023, back in 2021, back in 2020, that's not going to cut it anymore. We'll be back next week, likely doing an instant reaction pod after the Steelers play the Washington Commanders on Wednesday. Be sure to check out the show with Tommy Jagai and Shane Kubis as they go through all the early week news and notes about the Steelers. And then obviously they're going to preview that game against the Commanders and get you all set for Sunday and the weekend ahead. Be sure to like and subscribe and subscribe to the YouTube page. We really appreciate your support there. If you're a Steeler fan, if you like what we're doing here, our page is growing rapidly. We just passed 4,000 subscribers on the YouTube page, and we really appreciate your support for that. So with that, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to come back next weekend. And until next week, have a good one and go Steelers.